The sound of hurried footsteps echoed off the marble walls, mingling with the chatter of travelers, the rolling of luggage, and the distant wail of train whistles. Grand Central Station was alive with motion, a river of people moving with purpose, yet unaware of the storm about to break in their midst. The cold winter sunlight streamed through the giant arch windows, glinting off brass fixtures, yet the warmth it promised couldn't reach the heart of a man now frozen in terror. Nathan Cole's voice shattered the hum of the station like a lightning bolt. "Help my son, someone. Please help my son." The words cut through the crowd, urgent and raw, and for a brief moment, everyone froze. Phones were lifted, eyes widened. But reality failed to spark action. People hesitated, unsure, some whispering to each other, some gripping their children tighter. But no one moved forward. Nathan's hands trembled as he held Liam, his 6-year-old, who lay limp and pale in his arms. The boy's tiny chest barely moved. Nathan's mind raced, a torrent of thoughts and fears colliding with unbearable urgency. He had wealth, power, influence. He had built empires that stretched across continents, but none of that mattered now. All that mattered was this small life, fragile and fading, in the middle of the bustling station, surrounded by strangers who watched but could not help. Through the crowd, a figure emerged, moving with calm precision that contrasted sharply with the chaos. She was unremarkable to most, wearing a faded gray uniform, gloves dusted with cleaning powder, and the faint scent of bleach trailing behind her. Yet there was a quiet strength in her stride, a certainty that carried her straight toward the child. Julia Ramos had seen moments like this before, though no one at the station knew her story. To the world, she was invisible, a janitor who arrived before dawn and left after the last train. But today, her past and her pain would collide with destiny in a way no one could have predicted. Years ago, Julia had endured a loss that reshaped her life. Her young son, Ethan, had been taken from her in a moment of carelessness, a fleeting distraction, and the memory of him haunted every corner of her existence. But instead of letting grief consume her, she had chosen to prepare. Every free hour had been dedicated to learning the skills that might one day save a life. First aid courses, CPR practice on dummies, emergency drills. She had absorbed every detail, every step, every protocol. The world saw a quiet cleaning lady. She had become a guardian in waiting. Now, as she knelt beside Liam, she felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a flash of memory, but it did not paralyze her. She had faced tragedy before. She had trained for this. Her hands, gloved and steady, began the careful, practiced motions that could mean the difference between life and death. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing urgency, yet unsure how to act. Some filmed, some whispered, but Julia's focus was singular: save the child. Nathan's sobs echoed against the walls, desperate and pleading. "Please, don't let him go. Don't let him go." His voice was cracking, raw with fear. But Julia's presence brought a fragile thread of hope. She spoke softly, calmly, issuing instructions to him. As she worked, guiding his hands, checking his pulse, applying life-saving techniques with precision. "Stay calm. I've got him. We can do this." Minutes stretched, each one a lifetime. The station seemed to hold its breath, the usual din reduced to a tense silence around them. And in that silence, a transformation occurred, not just for Liam, who slowly began to stir, but for Nathan, who witnessed courage and compassion from someone the world would have overlooked. He realized then that heroism does not wear a crown or carry a title. It comes in quiet, steadfast forms, in those who have prepared, who have endured, and who act when the moment demands it. When Liam coughed and his fingers twitched, relief cascaded through Nathan, breaking him in both sobs and laughter. Round them, the crowd exhaled as if the air had been held too long. Julia's hands rested lightly on Liam's chest, ensuring stability. Yet she made no move to claim attention. To her, this was duty, compassion, the culmination of years of unseen preparation. A life saved, a grief tempered, a moment that would ripple far beyond the walls of that station. For Nathan, the lesson was searingly clear. In the face of desperation, true power is not in wealth or titles, but in presence, in courage, and in action. And for Julia, it was a quiet affirmation of purpose, a moment that made every hour of sorrow Every pang of loss, every sacrifice she had endured worth it. One small life saved in a vast, indifferent world, yet in that act, the entire universe seemed to pause, witness, and remember. As the station returned to its rhythm, life moving on around them, Nathan held his son close. His eyes found Julia's for the first time in the chaos, a fleeting glance filled with gratitude deeper than words. And in that glance, both understood something profound. Sometimes, the invisible are the greatest heroes, and the smallest acts of courage can echo far beyond what anyone can imagine. The crowd had dispersed slightly, whispers and murmurs weaving through the station like a gentle wind. Nathan held Liam close, his small body trembling from the ordeal, but alive. Relief washed over him in waves, though it could not erase the shock, the terror, the agonizing seconds that had felt like hours. Yet, as he looked down at his son's wide eyes, he realized he had no idea who had truly saved him. Julia Ramos, gloves still on, quietly moved to the side, allowing Nathan and Liam their fragile moment. She adjusted her uniform, wiped her hands on a rag, and glanced around at the people who now stared, their curiosity mingling with awe. But she remained invisible, as she always had been. To anyone else, she was just another janitor, quietly doing her job amid the chaos of commuters rushing to their next destination. But Nathan could not forget. Something about the way she moved, calm and precise in the eye of a storm, struck him with a clarity that was almost spiritual. It was not just her skill, but her courage, the kind that cannot be taught, that comes only from experience and a heart that refuses to turn away from suffering. He wanted to speak, to thank her, but words failed him. All he could do was watch as she returned to her cleaning cart. As though nothing extraordinary had occurred, the station buzzed again with life, trains arriving and departing, the ceaseless motion resuming. Yet beneath the routine, a ripple had passed through the crowd, a subtle shift in awareness. People had witnessed bravery in its purest form, unadorned by titles, wealth, or recognition. And in that quiet, unspoken understanding, a lesson lingered. Heroism often hides in plain sight. Julia pushed her cart down the polished floors, every motion deliberate, every step measured. Her mind, however, was far from the mundane tasks that consumed her day. She replayed the moment over and over, each detail vivid. The way Liam's lips had turned pale, the slight flutter of his eyelashes, the trembling of Nathan's hands, the raw anguish in his voice. And beneath the memory, the familiar ache of loss throbbed in her chest, echoing the sorrow she had carried for so many years. When she returned to her closet at the far end of the station to store her supplies, she paused in the quiet, fluorescent-lit space. Her reflection in the mirror caught her attention, and for a moment, she studied her own eyes. There was fatigue there, yes, and grief, but also a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. She whispered to herself, softly, almost reverently, "I did not fail today. I made a difference." Meanwhile, Nathan could not stop thinking about the woman who had saved his son. Her face, partially obscured by her hair and mask, lingered in his mind with haunting clarity. Determined to find her, he moved through the station, asking questions, scanning faces, seeking the quiet courage that had stepped into the chaos without hesitation. But no one seemed to know who she was. Co-workers shook their heads. Commuters shrugged. She had vanished back into the rhythm of the station, leaving no trace beyond the life she had preserved. Nathan's mind raced. He was used to solving complex problems, negotiating deals worth millions, steering global projects with precision. Yet this finding a woman who had acted with such skill and heart felt more daunting than any business challenge he had ever faced. He knew instinctively that discovering her identity was not just about gratitude. It was about understanding the force behind the courage, the source of the resolve that had saved his son. For Julia, the day moved forward in its usual cadence. Yet everything had changed. Each mop stroke, each empty trash bin, each routine wipe of a counter felt infused with new meaning. She had faced her past in that moment, confronted the pain she had carried for a decade, and emerged stronger. She knew, deep down, that life was fragile, unpredictable, and beautiful precisely because of its fleeting nature. And she understood that ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts when the need arose. When compassion outweighed fear, that evening, after her shift, she walked through the quiet streets of the city, bundled against the cold Liam's small image and Nathan's pleading face still vivid in her mind. She passed children playing, parents hustling, strangers who would never know the life-saving act that had occurred just hours before. And yet, she felt an unspoken connection to the world, a sense that even in anonymity, one could make a mark that transcended recognition. Nathan, on the other hand, returned to his penthouse with Liam asleep in his arms. But sleep did not come easily. He could not stop thinking about the janitor who had stepped forward, the invisible hero who had acted without expectation of reward. He began to research, to ask discreet questions, to follow leads through the station's staff directory, determined to find the woman who had become, in a single moment, the most important person in his life. Days passed, and Nathan's search became more than a personal quest. It became an obsession, a need to honor bravery and skill, to recognize that true heroes do not announce themselves. Julia continued her routine, never imagining that her quiet act would ripple into the life of a man whose influence spanned the globe. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One rainy afternoon, as Julia cleaned a corridor near the east wing, a familiar voice called her name. Startled, she turned, eyes widening to see Nathan standing there, not with the frantic fear of before, but with a steady determination, a quiet gravity that demanded attention. "Julia Ramos," he asked, voice soft but firm. "I need to thank you." Properly. Julia froze. Recognition, gratitude, and disbelief mingled in her chest. She had spent years avoiding the spotlight, believing her actions mattered only in the moment. And now, the man whose son she had saved stood before her, seeking not just thanks, but a connection forged in life and courage. That moment marked the beginning of a bond neither could have anticipated, a connection built on shared humanity, on the quiet heroism that changes lives, on the understanding that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, can shape destiny in ways unimaginable. And in that bond, a new chapter of both their lives began, one defined not by wealth or status, but by courage, compassion, and the enduring power of a single selfless act. The city streets were cloaked in a gentle mist, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. Julia walked slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the day that had shifted the trajectory of her life. Each step felt heavier with reflection, yet lighter with the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. She had always believed that courage could exist in small, unseen gestures, but now she realized how profoundly one act could ripple into the lives of others. Nathan had not left her mind since that rainy afternoon in the station. He had reached out, but cautiously, respectful of the distance she valued. Yet, every letter, every message, carried a tone of sincerity that Julia could not ignore. It was unusual for someone of his stature to move with such quiet humility, and it drew her curiosity. The man who had the world at his feet had been undone, however briefly, by the fragility of life, and that vulnerability had revealed a depth few would ever glimpse. As she arrived home that evening, Julia found herself staring at a small photograph. On her kitchen counter, it was Ethan, her son, frozen in time, smiling with eyes full of curiosity and mischief. She traced the outline of his face with her finger, memories flooding back in waves, laughter echoing through a sunlit backyard, tiny hands clutching hers as he explored the world. The pain of loss still lingered, a dull ache beneath the surface, yet intertwined with it was a spark of gratitude. That pain had given her the strength to act, to prepare, to stand ready when the moment demanded it. And now, after saving Liam, she understood that even sorrow could yield something transformative. Meanwhile, Nathan's life had entered an unfamiliar rhythm. His empire of technology, of boardrooms and international deals, continued its relentless pace. Yet he found himself distracted, haunted not by deadlines or profits, but by the memory of the janitor who had saved his son. He replayed the scene, repeatedly in his mind, the calm authority of her hands, the precision of her movements, the unwavering focus that had brought Liam back from the edge. It was not just skill. It was something deeper, a courage born from experience, grief, and resilience. Determined to meet her again, Nathan began to devise a plan. He could not simply call her into a corporate office or send a chauffeur. That would feel incongruous, impersonal, even intimidating. Instead, he arranged to visit the station under the guise of a regular commuter, blending into the rhythm of the daily crowd. His hope was to speak with her face to face, not as a billionaire CEO, but as a father deeply indebted to someone whose life-saving act could never be repaid. Julia, meanwhile, returned to her daily routine at Grand Central, the memory of Liam's fragile form never far from her mind. She pushed her cart along familiar corridors, swept the floors with practiced precision, and cleaned bathrooms that had witnessed thousands of hurried hands. Yet every movement now carried a subtle awareness, a recognition that even the most ordinary tasks could exist alongside extraordinary purpose. Each act, no matter how small, had potential meaning in the fabric of life. The next morning, as the station hummed with energy, Nathan arrived quietly, dressed plainly, walking among commuters with careful observation. He scanned the sea of faces, looking not for the uniform, but for the presence. He remembered the calm decisiveness, the subtle aura of someone who had confronted life's harshest moments and survived with grace. Hours passed, and frustration built, but Nathan refused to surrender to impatience. He understood now that courage often remained hidden, revealed only in the act itself, not in announcements or accolades. Julia, unaware of the subtle search underway, found herself pausing near a familiar corner of the station. A young mother struggled with a stroller while managing two toddlers, their cries blending with the ambient noise of the station. Without thinking, Julia moved to assist, adjusting the stroller and calming the children with gentle words. The mother glanced at her with gratitude, and Julia felt a quiet warmth, a reminder that her actions, however unnoticed, still mattered. It was in these fleeting, unacknowledged moments that purpose took root, connecting lives without fanfare or recognition. Suddenly, a voice called her name, tentative, careful, yet unmistakable. Julia turned, and for the first time in days, her gaze met Nathan's. The recognition in his eyes was clear, but there was no grandiose display, no overwhelming pressure, just a father who understood the debt of gratitude, standing with humility and quiet insistence. "Julia," he said softly, "I need to speak with you about what you did, about saving my son." Julia studied him for a moment, curiosity and caution mingling with the faintest flicker of trust. She had spent years learning to act without expectation, to step forward when others hesitated. And now, the very act that had defined her hidden heroism was being acknowledged by someone whose life she had touched in a profound way. She nodded, silently consenting, and they walked together to a quieter area of the station. Nathan spoke first, carefully, with an authenticity that surprised even him. "I've built companies, made decisions that affect millions. Yet nothing has ever struck me as deeply as what you did that day. You saved my son's life. I don't know how to thank you, but I need you to know, your courage matters, more than you might realize." Julia's hands, callous from years of labor, brushed the edge of her uniform nervously. I only did what I could," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I couldn't let another child suffer. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Nathan's eyes softened, recognizing the quiet heroism in her words, the selflessness that had defined her actions. "You're extraordinary," he said, not as a CEO, but as a man who had glimpsed true courage in its purest form. "And I think the world should know your story, not just because of what you did for Liam, but because of who you are, the person you've become through everything you've endured." Julia felt a shift within herself, a rare acknowledgement that her life, her grief, her silent preparation had meaning beyond what she had imagined. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider that her story and her courage could touch others in ways she had never dared to dream. And in that realization, a spark ignited a new purpose, not just in saving lives, but in inspiring them, in showing that even the unseen, the underestimated, could change the course of fate with a single act of bravery. Days passed in a blur of quiet reflection and subtle tension. Nathan found himself revisiting the station under various pretexts. though each time he hoped to encounter Julia in the mundane rhythm of her work. Every corridor, every stairwell, every echoing hallway seemed to hold the memory of that winter afternoon, the sharp cry, the frozen crowd, and the precise movements of a woman whose courage had surpassed his understanding. The more he searched, the more he realized that her heroism was not a single moment, but a lifetime of preparation, sacrifice, and resilience. Julia, on her part, moved through her daily routine with the practiced rhythm of years, yet her thoughts kept drifting to the man whose son she had saved. She found herself wondering if he was managing, if he had forgiven himself for the fear that had gripped him, if he had realized that even in the most powerful positions, life's fragility could strip away control in an instant. She did not seek recognition, yet the awareness that her actions had touched someone so profoundly left a quiet, persistent glow in her heart. One morning, as the station stirred with its usual frenzy of travelers, Julia noticed a commotion near the main entrance. People were gathering, murmuring, pointing. She approached cautiously and saw Nathan standing in the center, speaking to a small group of station staff. His tone was calm but filled with unmistakable conviction. "I want to make sure she's recognized," he said, his gaze scanning the crowd, searching for her among the moving faces. "Not for me, but because the world needs to know what true courage looks like." Julia felt a surge of apprehension. She had always believed that acts of heroism were most genuine when unseen, when they existed for the sake of life, not accolades. The thought of being placed at the center of attention was uncomfortable, almost foreign, and yet something in Nathan's approach reassured her, a sincerity that went beyond public acknowledgement, a desire to honor the essence of her courage, rather than the spectacle of it. Nathan continued, addressing those around him with measured words. "This woman saved a child's life when fear paralyzed everyone else. She did not act for recognition or reward. She acted because it was the right thing to do." Her dedication, skill, and unwavering courage remind us that heroes often exist quietly, unseen, yet their impact can be profound. Julia remained at the edge of the crowd, her uniform blending into the gray of the station, but her presence undeniable to those who had witnessed the scene unfold weeks earlier. She felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, a quiet affirmation that her years of preparation, her grief, and her resilience had meaning beyond her own understanding. As the crowd dispersed, Nathan approached her once more, his expression both determined and gentle. "Julia, I know you don't seek recognition, but the world deserves to see what you have done. I want to help you share your story, not for fame, but to inspire others to act when it matters most." Julia hesitated, memories of Ethan surfacing. Unbidden, the pain of loss, the long years of grief, the quiet nights spent wondering if she could have done more, they all pressed against her heart. Yet beneath the weight of sorrow was the undeniable truth. She had acted, she had saved a life, and in doing so, had reaffirmed her own capacity for courage. Slowly, she nodded, allowing herself to consider that her story, when shared, could give others hope, teach others to act, and honor not only Liam but the memory of her own son. Nathan smiled, sensing the shift, and together they walked through the station's corridors, speaking softly, planning the next steps. The partnership was not born of hierarchy or obligation, but of mutual respect and shared understanding. One had acted with skill and bravery. The other had recognized the value of that courage and sought to amplify it, to ensure that the lesson embedded in the act would resonate far beyond the marble floors of the station. As they reached a quiet platform, Julia's mind wandered to the countless lives that passed daily, unnoticed, unacknowledged, yet filled with potential for extraordinary acts. She realized that heroism did not require titles, wealth, or fame. It required awareness, preparation, and the willingness to act when circumstances demanded it. Nathan listened, captivated not by her words alone, but by the depth of conviction that underpinned them. In the days that followed, Nathan used his influence to highlight stories of quiet courage in public forums, sharing lessons learned from Julia's actions without revealing personal details that might compromise her privacy. Each mention was measured, respectful, and inspirational, allowing the essence of her bravery to resonate without reducing it to spectacle. Julia observed this with cautious optimism, seeing for the first time how her story could touch hearts and encourage action in ways she had never imagined. Yet, even amidst this new chapter of recognition and quiet partnership, challenges rose. Skepticism, misunderstanding, and the relentless pace of public attention threatened to overshadow the simplicity and purity of her courage. Julia navigated these waters with the same calm precision that had guided her through life-saving moments, refusing to let distractions dilute the core lesson that every individual has the power to act, to protect, and to make a difference, no matter how invisible they might feel. And so, as winter turned to early spring, a transformation unfolded not only in the lives of Nathan and Julia, but in the countless individuals who began to hear the story, from office workers to students, from commuters to volunteers. The message spread subtly yet powerfully. Courage exists in the quiet, in preparation, in selflessness, and in action. It is often unnoticed, but its impact is undeniable, and when embraced, it can reshape destinies, alter lives, and remind humanity of the profound strength inherent in each person. Julia stood one evening on the balcony of her modest apartment, looking out over the city that had been both her prison of grief and her stage of courage. The wind carried the faint sounds of life below: laughter, chatter, the distant rumble of trains, and she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had faced her past, acted in the moment that mattered most, and inspired someone whose reach could amplify the lesson she embodied. And in that realization, she understood something timeless, that even in anonymity, one can create ripples of hope and courage that extend far beyond their sight, touching lives in ways that echo through time. The city had grown quieter as night fell, but the energy of Grand Central lingered, a pulse that never truly rested. Julia moved through the station with her usual precision, yet her thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the recent days in endless loops. She had never imagined that an act she had done without expectation could ignite such waves of acknowledgement. Nathan's efforts to share her story, carefully and respectfully, had reached people far beyond the station walls. Yet with that recognition came a subtle pressure, a reminder that heroism, no matter how quiet, attracts attention, and attention can complicate even the simplest intentions. Nathan, meanwhile, wrestled with his own realization that life's value could not be measured in profits, accomplishments, or accolades. He had spent decades building empires, steering technology that shaped societies. Yet the raw intensity of fear he had felt that afternoon reminded him of life's fragility, in a way no corporate success ever could. His gratitude toward Julia had evolved into admiration, and more than that, a deep desire to ensure that her courage was not only seen, but understood for its purity and intent. One morning, a message arrived for Julia, an invitation to speak at a small community forum about courage, preparedness, and quiet heroism. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking had never been her path. Her actions were meant to be unseen, the satisfaction coming from the lives she could influence without notice. Yet something within her stirred a recognition that sharing her story could empower others, teaching that preparedness and compassion are tools anyone could wield. She accepted, not for fame, but to honor the memory of her son and the life she had saved. The forum was small, intimate, yet the anticipation in the room was palpable. Julia stepped onto the modest stage, her uniform replaced with simple, clean clothing, gloves absent, but the resolve still present, faces turned toward her, expectant and curious, and she felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. She drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past losses and the quiet strength she had cultivated over years of preparation. "I never sought recognition," she began, voice steady, "because what I do is not about me. It's about acting when it matters, about refusing to be paralyzed by fear, and about trusting that what you've learned can make a difference when it counts the most." Her words carried a sincerity that transcended the room. She spoke of Ethan, of the grief that had shaped her determination, and of the countless hours of learning, practicing, and preparing that had allowed her to act decisively when Liam's life hung in the balance. The audience listened, rapt, moved not by dramatic flair, but by the authenticity, the raw humanity embedded in her narrative. Back at the station, Nathan observed the subtle impact of her story. Through the ripples it created, colleagues, commuters, and local media had begun sharing the tale, emphasizing lessons rather than spectacle. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment, witnessing courage transform into inspiration. Yet he also sensed the fragility of recognition, how easily attention could distort purpose. If not handled with care, his role was not to elevate himself, but to ensure that Julia's message remained pure, that the essence of heroism was not lost amid noise. The city, too, seemed to respond. Acts of quiet kindness began appearing in unexpected places, a stranger helping an elderly woman across a busy street, a commuter assisting someone with a heavy bag, volunteers quietly teaching safety skills at community centers. Julia's example, amplified yet unadorned, reminded people that bravery is not reserved for the extraordinary alone. It exists in preparation, awareness, and willingness to step forward when others hesitate. Yet, amidst the burgeoning recognition, Julia faced internal challenges she had never anticipated. The attention forced reflection on her own grief, the years spent carrying guilt, and the delicate balance between anonymity and acknowledgement. Each question posed by reporters, each story shared, pressed her to reconcile the past with the present, to embrace vulnerability while maintaining the quiet dignity that had defined her courage. Nathan, recognizing this, approached her privately, offering a support that was neither patronizing nor intrusive. "You've inspired so many," he said, his tone measured yet earnest. "But I know the attention can be heavy. Know that you decide what story is told, how it's told. You remain in control." Julia nodded, appreciating the respect in his words, the understanding that her life and choices were hers to navigate. In the days that followed, a delicate equilibrium emerged. Julia continued her work at the station, each corridor and platform infused with a subtle new energy and awareness that the mundane could harbor moments of life-altering importance. Nathan returned to his enterprises, yet carried a renewed perspective, valuing human connection, courage, and integrity above all else. Together, though not always physically present, they created a silent partnership, one of action and recognition, preparation and amplification, courage and guidance. One evening, as Julia locked up her supplies and walked through the nearly empty station, a child ran past, chasing a parent, laughing in a way that reminded her of Ethan. She paused, watching the small figure, feeling a bittersweet warmth. Life, fragile yet beautiful, continued to unfold, and she knew that her purpose extended beyond single acts. Every lesson learned, every skill honed, every moment of courage could inspire, could protect, could ripple through countless lives she might never meet. Nathan watched from a distance, recognizing her in the quiet confidence she carried, understanding that this unassuming woman had not only saved his son, but had reshaped his understanding of heroism, of responsibility, and of the profound impact one prepared, selfless individual could have. And in that recognition, both understood a truth larger than either had anticipated. True courage exists not for acknowledgement, but for the lives it touches, the hope it ignites, and the enduring example it sets for those willing to act when the world needs them most. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Grand Central Station, painting the marble floors in soft gold and igniting the brass fixtures with a quiet warmth. Julia walked through the station, her steps measured, her heart steady, yet beneath the surface, an unfamiliar anticipation lingered. It was not fear nor anxiety, but the sensation that a chapter of her life, one she had never expected to write, was reaching its culmination. She paused for a moment, letting the hum of the station settle around her, and thought of the countless lives that passed daily, each one carrying unseen stories, untold struggles, and quiet courage waiting to be awakened. Nathan had arranged something today, though he had not revealed the full details. Julia had agreed to trust him, not out of obligation, but because she sensed the same respect and integrity she had come to recognize in him. As she moved toward the designated meeting spot, she noticed a small crowd gathering, a mix of station employees, commuters who had heard whispers, and a few journalists invited to witness something extraordinary. Julia's chest tightened. The spotlight was unfamiliar, yet the purpose was noble. This moment was not about recognition for herself, but about illustrating the power of courage, preparation, and compassion. Nathan approached quietly, not with grandeur or ceremony, but with the calm confidence of someone who had understood what truly mattered. "Julia," he said softly, as if speaking to a partner in a long journey, "today, we're showing the world what true heroism looks like. Not for fame, not for reward, but so that others may learn, act, and be inspired." Julia nodded, the weight of responsibility settling in alongside a rare spark of excitement. She had trained for life or death situations, yet the standing before an audience, telling her story felt equally intense. She drew a deep breath, recalling Ethan's laughter, Liam's fragile body in her hands, and the countless hours she had spent learning, preparing, and hoping she would never face a moment like that again. And now, she realized, it was her chance to transform pain into inspiration, grief into guidance. When she began to speak, the room fell silent, as if the city itself had paused to listen. "Courage is not always visible," she said, voice steady, carrying the weight of experience. "It does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it is found in the quiet preparation, in the choice to act, when fear would paralyze you, and in the willingness to help someone you have never met." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. "Years ago, I lost someone I loved deeply. I could have surrendered to grief, to guilt, to despair. Instead, I chose to prepare. I learned skills, practiced relentlessly, and hoped that, if life demanded it, I could make a difference." She recounted, without sensationalism, the events of that cold winter afternoon, emphasizing not her heroism, but the principles that guided her actions: calm focus, knowledge, and selfless dedication. Listeners leaned in, captivated by the authenticity of her words. There was no exaggeration, no embellishment, only truth, raw and resonant, and the realization that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary circumstances when they chose to act. Nathan watched quietly, pride and gratitude mingling with awe. He saw not only the woman who had saved his son, but the resilience, depth, and humanity that had carried her through years of private struggle. He understood now that the greatest acts of courage often left no immediate mark, but had the power to reshape destinies in ways the world rarely acknowledges. After the speech, the room erupted in applause, not for spectacle, but in recognition of principle. People came forward, asking questions about preparation, about courage, about how to act in moments of crisis. Julia answered with humility, offering guidance and encouragement, emphasizing that anyone could learn, practice, and be ready. Her story became a blueprint, not for hero worship, but for empowerment, a reminder that the capacity to save, to protect, and to inspire resides within all of us. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the quiet transformation unfolding within a few walls. Julia stepped onto the platform, the sunlight catching her hair, and felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She realized that her life's grief, her silent years of preparation, and her unwavering commitment to act when necessary had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. She had turned loss into purpose, invisibility into influence, and quiet courage into a message capable of inspiring countless others. Nathan approached her one last time, offering a simple nod of acknowledgement. "You've done more than save a life," he said. "You've reminded us all of what it means to be truly courageous." Julia smiled faintly, understanding that the words were true, but the real reward had always been within the act itself, the moment when fear bowed to resolve, and life was preserved by selfless action. In the following weeks, stories began to circulate, small, human-focused narratives of courage, preparation, and selfless action. Communities started workshops on emergency preparedness. Schools introduced programs on helping others, and ordinary people discovered the profound impact of stepping forward when others hesitated. Julia remained largely anonymous, her identity known only to a few, but the essence of her story permeated society, proving that heroism does not require recognition, only action. And in the quiet moments, when she walked the polished floors of the station, pushing her cart, sweeping the floors, and tidying spaces unnoticed by the masses, Julia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had honored her past, transformed grief into purpose, and shown the world that courage is not about titles, wealth, or fame. It is about choice. It is about preparation. It is about acting when it matters most, even when no one is watching. As she glanced toward the distant platform, Nathan appeared, a subtle smile on his face. No words were needed. Their shared understanding transcended language. Life was fragile, yes, but it was also precious, capable of transformation by those who chose to act with bravery, compassion, and unwavering commitment. And in that knowledge, Julia knew, truly, that the world could be changed, one courageous act at a time. The story of that winter afternoon, of a child saved, of courage rising quietly in the shadows, would continue to ripple far beyond the station's walls, touching lives, inspiring action, and proving an eternal truth. Heroes exist not for recognition, but for the lives they protect, the hope they ignite, and the enduring legacy they leave in the hearts of those they touch.